Hey everyone, once again, this is Lori Delk-Radecki. This is lesson 2 of the public speaking course. And so on this one, our topic is going to be you should know your stuff as well as your audience. So, figuring out your topic selections of what are you going to talk about? Who are you talking to? Your audience analysis, right? So, if you're in ministry, if you're in business, whoever you're talking to, if you're talking to children, if you're talking to teenagers, if you're talking to young adults, middle-aged adults, senior adults, a mixture of all, you have to know your audience and analyze that. So this section is going to cover on how to choose a compelling topic, as well as tailoring your message to connect with the certain listeners depending on who they are. And we're going to emphasize like understanding their needs, their interests, as well as prior knowledge. So sometimes you're speaking at an event or in a church, if it's ministry, where you're speaking to people that you don't know, like you're traveling, an evangelist maybe, or you're visiting another church and they ask you to speak. Or the same thing in business, you might go somewhere and somebody asks you to speak at an event that you were planning on just attending. I've had that happen before where I was just attending an event and then somebody found out who I was and they asked me to come up and speak on something last minute. And so you still need to figure out kind of who your audience is. And so one of the first things you want to do is start with an engaging question or scenario. So, have you ever felt like you were speaking a different language than the person you were talking to? Like they're just staring at you with this glossy-eyed look. In public speaking, that disconnect could be the difference between a message that resonates with people versus one that falls flat. So imagine pouring your heart and soul into, crafting the perfect presentation and then only to see blank stares from your audience or disengaged faces. That especially can happen online because a lot of times when people get in Zoom rooms or webinars, if you can see their faces, when I'm doing speaking things like that, a lot of times I try not to look because it can make you start thinking, what went wrong? But many times the answer lies in you truly not knowing your stuff and who you're talking to. So you have to figure that out and you have to practice and you have to work on it. And the practice takes time, right? But you going over things, especially if you do have that time to work on things ahead of time, so you need to go over it ahead of time before you're talking to other people. But so some of the things you want to do is you want to introduce like the core concepts. So clearly state the importance of both your topic selection, what you chose, and the same thing, your audience analysis. Like that's the bedrock of effective public speaking. And then next, you're going to state your goal for that session or lesson or sermon. So just like at the beginning of this session, I talked about exactly what we're going to go over. So you can say like, today we'll explore how to choose topics that ignite your passion and how to deeply understand that your audience so that your message not only reaches them, but also truly connects. And then briefly outline what you're going to cover in that. So like here, we're going to discuss strategies for finding compelling topics and methods for in-depth audience analysis. And so part 1 is igniting your passion. What are you passionate about? What do you love to talk about, right? So like in business or in ministry, a lot of times we can talk about different things that we really have a passion about. And then there's sometimes that you still have to talk on things and cover topics that you're not as excited to talk about, but you feel like God led you to talk about them. But so there's an art to your topic selection. And so one is the power of that personal connection. So most engaging speeches often stem from genuine interest and passion. When you care about your topic and or your people you're presenting to, your enthusiasm becomes contagious. It infuses your delivery and captivates your audience. And the same thing, your tone of voice and your inflection plays a part in that. How excited are you to talk to your people? Or is it just a part of your mundane, this is what I have to do because this is what I have to do? And then encourage introspection from your audience. Like, what keeps you up at night? What sparks your curiosity? What could you talk about for hours without getting bored? So you can share different examples of like compelling speeches that were born from personal experiences or deep interests. Like with me, just a few topics that I've spoke on is being a Christian wife, being a homeschooling mom, being a teacher in a Christian school, being a cop's wife. My children's dad was a police officer for 16 years. Being a widow, he was killed in a car wreck in 2013. Losing a baby, our baby number 5 would have been born in 2009, and we lost her after 5.5 months. Having a child go through cancer, my oldest got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at 29 years old, and thankfully she's better now and wonderful. Caring for a parent, I cared for my mom with alongside my dad when she got cancer. I also took care of my grandmother-in-law for several years, and then my father-in-law for several years that lived with us and we cared for, but many more things. Those are just a few of the personal things that I can talk on. And then I have many topics in the corporate world as well, like starting a business in 1993 and leaving a Fortune 500 company that I worked in accounting for 10 years to become a full-time mommy, but still be able to help with the bills at home. And we were pregnant with our second child, and my husband was transitioning his passion of becoming a police officer and losing half of his income at the time. And so there's lots of different areas, right? So think of the different areas that you have stories, and also anything that you're talking on, how you can implement stories into those speeches. And then you want to brainstorm for strategies. So things like mind mapping, free writing, news, current events, those can generate topic ideas. Don't censor yourself in the initial stages. Let your ideas flow freely. You can refine things later. Same thing, always pray about what you should talk about. Before I ever go to any event, I pray for God to lead me into what to say and keep my mouth shut where I should keep it shut and talk about what God wants me to talk about. But the same thing, like you can fit in different things like hobbies, academic interests, professional experiences, social issues. Um, you can intertwine those things into your speech to make it relatable, because like in sales training, I always teach, stories sell. That's in business, but that's also in ministry. That's in any speaking engagement. Stories sell. When you can make it relatable to your audience, they're going to grasp what you're talking about better. And so that comes next to considering your speaking context. Align your topic with the assignment guidelines that you have, maybe your time constraints. You have to look at if you're an event or even in church and ministry, usually there's a general time constraint that you're supposed to kind of abide by, right? So, and depending on where you're at, you might be able to go a little bit over, you might be able to go a little bit under, but you want to generally stick to a certain time constraint. And then the same thing, the overall purpose of your talk, your speech, your lesson your passion needs to intersect with those requirements of that speaking situation. So, and it could be different contexts, right? Like it could be informative, it could be persuasive, it could be celebratory, it could be, all different kinds of influences might help you with your topic selection. But and then the same thing, if you're in ministry and you're coming up with the topics yourself, or if somebody's giving you the topics in business, and that can be in ministry also. So think of different ways to come up with not only the topic, but what is going to go into that topic. And then you want to narrow your focus, right? So a lot of times we could have really broad topics, but you want to narrow it and refine it into manageable and specific speech topics. So just like in this lesson of public speaking, this course, I had to narrow it down into different speech topics, right? Because then you can focus on that, and that allows for a deeper exploration and a clearer message on that specific topic. So narrowing down a topic, can be like, just for an example, climate change to the impact of single-use plastics on local waterways, right? So, depending on what it is, you can narrow it down a little, or you can narrow it down drastically. But, and then also, like, think of your audience when you're coming up with your speech. Think of them saying, "So what? Like, why does that affect me?" So consider the relevance and the significance of your topic for yourself, but as well as your audience. Why should they care? What value are they going to gain from listening to you? And will they fall asleep while you're preaching or teaching? Is it going to keep their attention? Okay, and so then part two of this is unlocking your audience. So figuring out, and like I said before, the science of your audience analysis. So you want to be able to analyze who you're speaking to if you know that ahead of time. So why does that matter? Because the speaker's message is always filtered through the listener's perspectives. Your words aren't just heard, they're interpreted based on their individual experiences, their beliefs, and their knowledge. So, like if it's in ministry, they probably have similar or same beliefs as you. In business, maybe not so. But the same thing in business, maybe they're still looking to get better, do better, right? But you have to analyze your audience, and understanding your audience minimizes the risk of miscommunication and maximizes that connection. And so you're going to speak to adults different than you're going to speak to 2-year-olds most of the time. Right? So figuring out your audience and finding out exactly what type of people you're going to speak to. Whenever I get asked to speak at an event, I always ask what kind of people attend normally, and try to get some different ideas from that. Some different factors that you could consider are like demographics. So their age, their gender, their cultural background, their education level, their socioeconomic status, and like, while you're still avoiding stereotypes, understanding that general demographic is going to help you to figure out your approach on how you would talk to people. And then, understanding the values, like their beliefs, their attitudes, their interests, or even their needs, right? What motivates them? What's their concerns? What do they already believe? Because it's not just about you, right? If you're speaking to a group of people, it's about them. And how can you help them? How can what you say enhance their life or business or ministry and make it better than they were before they spoke with you or before they heard you? And so a lot of times, like I said before, that prior knowledge and experience is going to be beneficial for you if you have it. Not always going to have that, but if you do have it, that always helps. But you can gauge what your audience already knows. Like, are they novices? Are they experts, or are they somewhere in between? Right? So that works in business and in ministry both. A lot of times you're going to have different people in the audience on different levels. But depending on if you're speaking to a large group or a small group that is more, you know exactly where they're coming from and what level they're at. But that's also going to help determine your level of the detail and the terminology that you're going to use, because you want to use terms that people understand, that people can relate to. And that's also goes back into pulling into personal stories where people can relate to that. And then the same thing, figure out the occasion for the speech and your context. So consider the purposes of the gathering. Like I said before, the time of day. Is it first thing in the morning? Is it the mid-afternoon slump? And so you need to be a lot more engaging if it's right after lunch and people get a lot of carbs in and they're just in that slough mode. The location of the event, any other relevant any other relevant factors. One time I did an event at a place where it was the back room of a restaurant, but they had TVs all around the room, and so there was a game on. So there was a lot of people, looking at me, and then they would glance at the game, right? And so you have to think about what is in your environment and how you can keep people's attention. And a speech at a conference is going to differ from that, right? A speech in ministry in a church is going to differ from that. Same thing, it's going to differ at like a big community gathering where there's going to be a lot of people moving around and a lot of people doing different things, right? So depending on where you're speaking, you have to roll all that into that. And then some other methods and ideas to analyze your audience is, like, if you can ahead of time, doing surveys, doing questionnaires, having informal conversations. You can do online research to gather information. You can find out about an event, or if you're going to another church to speak, or a company at a business thing, finding out about that. Look for that information, but also don't be afraid to ask questions and do your homework before that. So that way you are prepared. And then observe and use your listening skills during any pre-speech interactions, as well as during your speech. As you see people, if you can see their faces, if you can see that they look like they're falling asleep, or they're not engaged, they're, looking the other way, they're looking down at their phone, whatever they're doing, right? That can a lot of times give you tips on what you need to do in your message. You might need to step up your speech inflections a little bit more. You might not necessarily change the topic, but add different things in so you can adapt your message on the fly, right? That audience analysis informs you of those key aspects for speech preparation, including your language choices, supporting evidence, your delivery style, but your message isn't static. It's a living entity that adapts to its environment. And that environment is your audience. So as you're speaking, if you can see their eyes, it's always much better that you can change things on the fly to, you still might stay on topic, but it's going to be presented differently to different audiences depending on who you're speaking to and how their reactions are while you're speaking. So a couple conclusions on this is, recap your interconnectedness. Effective public speaking hinges on the synergy between knowing your topic deeply and understanding your audience intimately, right? So your passion is going to fuel your message, and understanding that audience helps to direct that more effectively. And then approach your topic selections and your audience analysis with curiosity, with empathy. If you're speaking at someone's funeral, or visiting someone in the hospital, you know, your voice inflection is gonna be different, right? So embrace the challenge of finding your voice and learning how to connect with others, because it's in that connection that the true power of public speaking lies. It's not just speaking on stages, it's also speaking one on one to people, it's speaking in small groups to people. And so, some final thoughts are: leave people with a memorable statement about the potential impact of, a thoughtful and audience centered communication that you have with them. So, when you know your stuff and you know your audience, then your words have the power to inform. They could have the power to inspire, and they could have the power to create meaningful change that's going to make a difference, that's going to leave them better than they were before they heard your speech or talked with you, right? So think about that thing and choose topics that ignite your soul, and understand why your audience is in your heart and in your mind, because the world is waiting to hear what you have to say. But if it's something that you don't prefer to talk about, then maybe, if you can, you defer that to allowing somebody else to speak on that topic that they might have more excitement and more passion to talk on that subject, right? So, at different business events that I speak at, there's usually several speakers and different ones speak on different topics. I might be able to speak on a certain subject, but I might defer that to someone else because that's not my favorite thing to talk on, right? But remember, throughout your speech, maintain an enthusiastic and engaging tone, and use relatable examples and stories to illustrate your points. And then incorporate rhetorical questions to encourage your audience's reflection. Vary your vocal delivery and use confident body language, and encourage interaction if you can, questions if that's appropriate for your teaching style or wherever you're at. But by delivering your speeches with this passion and clarity, you're going to effectively convey the crucial importance of your topic selection, as well as figuring out your audience analysis and setting your students or your people on the path to becoming more impactful and being more engaging when they are talking to others. So I hope these tips helped you. You can always reach out to me if you have any questions, or let me know what helped you the most. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.